This presentation today, I'm going to go over the participatory planning process that our team engaged in, the community identified priorities, and then also some next steps that were certainly informed by the community-based organizations and community members that we worked alongside as well. For Pueblo planning, social equity starts with a thoughtful and reparative process. And for this reason, prior to any engagement process, our team works with community-based organizations, partners to co-develop an engagement framework. And really the engagement framework serves as a tool for understanding the communities engaged and identifies their needs in advance to the actual engagement process itself. The framework most significantly serves as a guide so that facilitators account for necessary information when developing the listening session and tailors our approach to each community itself. We certainly could not have done this work alone and relied upon our community-based partners to make this a successful effort as well. The Pueblo planning team intentionally included and prioritized core transit riders as part of this process. And specifically those that we identified that could potentially be most impacted from any MTS decision regarding services, policies, budgets, design, and so forth. We partner with 5 community-based organizations to engage with intentional communities, including people with disabilities, low wealth Black communities and communities of color, elderly, youth, and people who are unhoused or facing housing insecurity, immigrants, refugees, and binational migrants. Pueblo Planning partnered with 5 community-based organizations for the listening session, and these CBOs were chosen due to their authentic relationships with communities intentionally identified for this particular project. You know, we acknowledged that there are a multiple of community-based organizations that could potentially have been partners for this project. However, budget, timeline, you know, and then also looking at these intentional communities did narrow our potential partners to these 5, which we have a lot of gratitude. City Heights Community Development Corporation, the ARC of San Diego, El Cajon Collaborative, Casa Familiar, and I Am Green. To give you a snapshot of our timeline, we started this project back last April of 2022. Before we started the process, we wanted to be really mindful of what folks have shared before in previous MTS or even SANDAG planning processes. And then also look at historical archives in the media to understand what experience have already been shared so that when we then engage the community, we weren't starting from square one, but that we could actually engage people in a more thoughtful and nuanced conversation in a way too where people didn't experience feeling like we've already told you, right? So that we can go deeper into these conversations. And then in mid-June, we actually got the listening session started and they went on to mid-August. And then by the end of August, early September, we were finished with our listening sessions and started doing our summary and analysis, presented these findings to the MTS staff in October, and then MTS staff soon after started working on identifying potential projects for the $3 million to be implemented right away. And then here we are today in May.
Can I break in for just a minute?
Yes.
What cities did you choose on this? Can you go over that? Because
yeah,
like
absolutely.
Imperial Beach, National City, Chula Vista,
yeah, so
Santee, and Poway.
Yeah, so I will show a map in just a minute. Yeah. So in terms of workshops, we did a series of workshops and pop-ups. For the first 5 workshops in partnership with CBOs, the planning team focused on developing an understanding of how transit riders define accessibility and safety, and facilitated discussions for community members to share their vision of what is necessary for a joyful transit experience and the type of relationship community members would like to have with MTS specifically. Once we did the first round of 5 listening sessions, we went back to those same communities and shared with them what we heard to better assess, hey, did we get this right? Did we misunderstand? Was there something that we missed? So they kind of checked our homework as well with those kind of feedback loop sessions. We also engaged in a series of 3 pop-ups as well. We acknowledge that the MTS service area is quite diverse geographically. And so we wanted to purposely select geographic areas that maybe weren't necessarily being reached by the listening sessions themselves. And so with community-based organization partners, there was 3 additional recommended communities to identify to engage with in terms of the pop-ups. This included rural communities, portside communities such as National City, Barrio Logan, and also Linda Vista as well. For the community pop-ups, we were in some cases at transit stops, and others in front of community-based organizations as well, to hear from folks. I know this map is a little bit difficult to see, but in the report you could see it a little bit more clear. We did this map just to show kind of the geographic reach of folks we engaged. Down south in San Isidro, we primarily did that work with Casa Familiar. The portside communities, we did a pop-up at the Barrio Logan transit station. For southeastern San Diego, we partnered with I Am Green, and that's kind of where you see kind of the shaded colors is kind of the service area in which they drew community members from. Mid-city area, we partnered with we partnered with City Heights CDC. And then Linda Vista, we did a pop-up at a farmer's market they have on Thursday evenings to reach the rural populations, which was going to be a bit of a challenge, but we really wanted to be intentional about including that population in the conversation as well. We actually facilitated a pop-up at the El Cajon transit station and placed our engagement activities right where the buses were coming from the rural communities. And so we talked to folks from Mountain Empire to Tecate and so forth. So being really mindful of where we're strategically placing our engagement activities. Our team also recognized that, conversations on social equity and transit are not new, and that there's already established MTS committees, right? Having these conversations. As a result, and really much in part, really with the support of Stacy and Mark on the MTS team, we're able to facilitate conversations with the MTS Accessibility Service Advisory Committee, and then also MTS's Community Advisory Committee as well, to engage them in the conversation. So at this time, I'm gonna actually take you to the streets and to the communities in which we engaged. One of the activities we had folks do is we wanted to take public comment to the streets. And so if you've ever been to Build-A-Bear, you've seen these little buttons here. We've had these buttons at every engagement, and folks can leave, we asked folks to leave a message to you all. And so here are some of the messages and some of the images to give you a look and feel of what it was like in that space, but also what are some of the highlights that people shared as well.
I love taking transit because you can appreciate the diversity of our city, and I hope that we can continue to keep our transit riders diverse by making sure that everyone can afford transit and making sure that we don't unnecessarily criminalize and penalize people.
They're doing a great job. I just wish the trolley cops would never ask us so much.
Yo lo único que les suplico es la limpieza del trolley. Está súper, súper sucio.
Okay, so the buses, I feel that they should be a little bit cleaner, and the drivers should give respect. Just have an understanding that you have to give respect to receive respect. So people are going through different things. So, just be mindful of that.
Trolley operators, please be compassionate that disabled and elderly people need to get on the trolley. I've seen wheelchairs left behind multiple times.
I'd like to give a pleasant shout out to all the bus drivers on routes 41 and 44. You guys are amazing and so professional, and my students and I always love when we're riding your buses.
I would like to see more efforts in having bus shelters across as many bus stops as possible, and to also have those bus stops to have some sort of greenery or solar panels on them so they could be self-sufficient.
More toilets, please.
I'd love to see more roofs and added fans to bus stops, as well as electric outlets and public Wi-Fi as well.
I think Having shade cover in bus stops and trolley stations is necessary, as well as trash cans and bathrooms, and I think transit should be free for all.
We need free transit for everyone because it'll allow for a more equitable transit system in our communities and will create more joy for everyone who rides transit.
Public transportation should be free for everyone, not just for the youth, not just for the seniors, but for everyone.
The best thing that MTS could do to really increase ridership would be to increase the frequency of all service, ideally every 5 minutes. That way, if you have to do a transfer, you know that it won't be more than 5 minutes to make the transfer.
The Pronto card system is an excellent way to pay. Just please keep it in place for an extended period of time. The transitions to get people onto the Pronto card are taking a long time, but once they're on them, it's a flawless system. So keep them in place.
Trolley expansion would be so handy. Expand the trolley to East counties for Spring Valley, Poway, Hamul, trolley expansion. It'll solve a lot of problems, shuttles and buses not running a lot.
Considero que la importancia de la seguridad es algo muy esencial el que tomar en cuenta, porque es algo en donde la gente se va a sentir más segura al tomar el MTS y trolley, y creo que es algo muy importante para tomar en consideración.
I don't really have a relationship with MTS because I don't see MTS employees, so I think that if there was more employees around and like customer service, I would be able to interact with them and, you know, get on and off the trolley easier.
Keep up the good work, MTS, about passes for the kids. I think that's a great opportunity for the kids going on. You guys are doing a great job. Thanks.
Quiero darles las gracias por el pasaje gratis del año a los estudiantes.
So as you can see, our engagement was, you could hear it, was multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, but really at the heart of it, and also multi-ability too. Again, working with the ARC of San Diego was really great addition to the conversation. And so you can see there's a diversity of priorities for folks. And what I'm going to do next is actually share some of the key findings, what those community identified priorities are as well. So we aggregated the data in a couple of different ways. One, knowing that there's great geographic diversity in the MTS service area, we wanted to, and also, you know, the transit riders experience maybe in El Cajon is different than San Isidro, is different in other parts, right? So we wanted to look at the data first to see, are there any consistent patterns regardless of location, right? And so this is what you're looking at here first. There was a total of 15 engagement workshops and pop-ups. And within that, there were 10 unique locations throughout the region where the engagement was held. At every single location where engagement was held, there was two things that rose to the top, not necessarily meaning that they were the most frequently stated things, and we'll get to that in the next chart, but there were two things that rose to the top. Every single place we did any kind of workshop or pop-up, cleanliness and restrooms was mentioned at least a handful of times, right? If you look at least 9 out of the 10 workshops and pop-ups, I'll cover these top 3 here. Compassionate care and partnership with community services. I'll talk about that in more detail when I get to that particular side. Customers, making sure that there's customer service staff, treatment by transit security, treatment by bus operators, seating, shade, and I'll get into some of these as we get further down. So we also wanted to slice the data in a different way as well, not only by kind of better identifying the patterns across the MTS service area, at least the parts we were able to cover, but also what was the number of times mentioned overall for each one of these things. The number one thing that was mentioned is cleanliness and the need for that. Second, treatment by bus operators, a lot of support for the Youth Opportunity Pass, shade, increased weekend transit frequency, and then there's a lot in terms of frequency. But you could see in this chart here, what were those kind of maybe top 20 or so items that were mentioned overall as well. The other thing I want to note too, just to kind of navigate this chart and also navigate the report as well, we like a lot of color, so here we have it. but the color has a purpose. And so in order to make meaning as well, there were so many things that was shared with us, but in order to make meaning, we made these kind of broader buckets of information, right? So that it could be more actionable by MTS. So we split it up into amenities, operations, customer service, and programs, just so that it's more, the ability to make it more actionable as well. So I'm going to start to dive into each one of the kind of the top items or priorities that community members shared for each one of these sections. I won't be able to go over every single one on this slide, but I'll highlight a few that really stood out to us. One in terms of shade. Now, mind you, we did the engagement in the summer and it was quite a hot summer. And so shade was up there a lot, particularly when we engaged with folks in El Cajon. It was quite hot. And so people really talked about the importance of not only having shade at transit stops, but also having trees on your way to transit as well to make the experience more bearable and all. We also heard from folks in terms of having access to Wi-Fi. Many folks we engaged with don't necessarily have large data plans. They use their phones to navigate public transit. So having access to Wi-Fi at stops or on trolleys and trains would be helpful and also could help them be productive or pass the time as well. Restrooms was also noted as well. It wasn't in the top 10. I think it was number 12 or something like that, but certainly in the top 20. The need for restrooms at key transit stops is a community priority. Like I said, we heard at every single listening session. We heard in particular from parents traveling with children how difficult it was for them to do so. Having a 4-year-old myself, they don't let you know until it's the last minute. So it's very difficult. And then also we've heard from a number of folks who would have to pay more money to go to a fast food restaurant or a convenience store just to go use a restroom. So they'd buy a drink or something. And so paying more money out of pocket just to have that basic amenity. We also heard a lot about lighting in terms of people feeling uncomfortable when and unsafe when it's dark. Even talking about how in some cases people were passed by bus drivers because they just couldn't be seen at the stops as well. Operations, there's a lot of things in terms of operations. Like I mentioned, cleanliness was the #1 thing or priority mentioned overall. Folks talked about overflowing trash cans at bus stops or even just kind of trash being left behind in buses or trolley cars as well. And then frequency in a lot of different ways was also shared in terms of increasing weekend frequency, extending to night service, increasing transit headways to 5 to 10 minutes, and then also more frequency in rural areas as well. Customer service. So in terms of treatment by bus operators, community members shared about poor experiences with bus drivers and express how maybe they've experienced how bus drivers may have spoken rudely to them, maybe impatient loading or waiting for folks to get on the bus, not being as empathetic to transit riders, particularly with auditory, visual, or mobility impairments, helping get the ramp down and those types of things are some of the stories we heard. And community members shared that they'd like bus drivers to obtain education and training on customer service to address these issues. But as part of the scope of this process, we didn't have the opportunity to connect with the bus operators. And so I think it'd be incredibly helpful, right, to hear directly from the operators themselves about what their experiences are as well, and how collectively to explore support systems to build their capacity, to reduce their stress levels, and really set them up for success as well. We heard a lot about having customer service staff, MTS staff at key transit stops, folks in polo shirts, unarmed, folks that are there that could help you with your Pronto card, if there's a need, help you navigate the system and all, and really wanting to see a more MTS staff members out in the community itself. We also heard about treatment from security as well. Some people confided that they've had negative experiences, abrasive verbal or physical interactions with securities. Community members requested that safety, taking public transit can be achieved also through other means. People talked about lighting, more transit frequency, and all. In terms of programs, as part of this engagement process, one exciting thing for me was to hear what folks really loved about MTS as well. And when we engaged folks in that conversation, the number one thing that folks mentioned was the Youth Opportunity Pass. People love it. We talked to teenagers who are using the program, talked about the opportunities that they're now being able to engage in. We talked to parents. They talked about kind of the freedom of not having to drive them if they had that capacity to do so. So that was something that was deeply liked. I want to dive into a little bit on the compassionate care and partnership with community services. A few people, when we talked about when they talked about people that they perceived as being unhoused, asked for more security presence. However, we wanted to engage in a much deeper conversation about why they had held strong opinions on that. They often share discomfort with people who maybe cannot maintain a certain level of hygiene, and then concerns about some behaviors displaying mental health issues. And I just also want to note that's not exclusively just to someone who may be unhoused as well. As our team engaged in conversations with community members and reflected the ideas that other community members presented, such as partnerships with community service programs, community members were supportive of these partnerships with organizations to support them. When we engaged these other options as well, by and large, folks were willing and interested in taking a more empathetic approach to this issue as well. But one notable thing, we were really intentional about engaging folks who are unhoused or facing housing insecurity as part of this process. And we wanted to hear their thoughts too about that. And so one notable element from folks who are currently unhoused or facing housing insecurity is they didn't necessarily ask for more social service. They just asked for a more dignified transit rider experience. They talked a lot about their interactions with security and not always positive in that space. So there's other notable priorities that didn't necessarily make it to the top 20 because they weren't things that were maybe shared as high of frequency than other items. But I have them here in the report too as other notable priorities, because even if a handful of people or even just one person shared, because of their potential impact to hundreds, if not thousands, of transit riders in the MTS service area as well. So some of these, I won't go over each one of these, but I'll just highlight a few that particularly stuck out as kind of maybe a newer conversation in this space. One is around education for newcomers. So as you know, the San Diego region being a resettlement area, it is a space in which there are refugees and immigrants making San Diego home. But folks talked about that the transit system is different than maybe previous transit systems that they were familiar with. And so having some targeted partnership and guidance, maybe with community-based organizations to serve that population and integrate them into the transit riders that they want to be. Also in terms of disability justice, really, what we heard from folks wasn't one particular thing, but really about this mindful practice of ensuring that folks within the disabilities justice community are included at these conversations and are at the decision-making tables around programs, around amenities, and what have you. So being just really intentional about the inclusion of folks in that community. The last thing I want to mention, and only one person shared this story, but I think it's notable because of the families that it's impacting. At one of the workshops, a mother pulled me aside and she shared with me that her daughter is at the East Mesa Juvenile Detention Center. And she shared that there is no public transit there. And it limits how often she's able to visit her daughter. She can only get there by taking Lyft. And she can't do that often. And the strain that it's putting between her and her daughter, right? only one person shared it, but it's notable in the sense that there's probably hundreds of families facing this very issue as well. And so that's why I wanted to uplift her story here today. So a reparative process, overall, the social equity listening tour was a public engagement effort that gave space for community members to share their transit experience, their vision for what what they would like the space to have and include. But specifically, the social equity listening tour aimed to gain a deeper understanding of community stories around equity, public transit, and identify areas of concern for MTS riders and identify priorities for communities within the MTS service area. It is important to note that this is not the first time, right, that community members have shared what changes that they'd like to see. And community-based organization partners and community members express that there is a need for a reparative process moving forward. And here's some of the suggestions that we heard from folks that help inform what we're going to be sharing here today. So what can be these steps towards a reparative relationship? One is folks really have a desire for continued direct relationship built between community members and MTS staff in order to prevent the community feeling like MTS has disappeared. So what is being done to continue to engage those folks that were part of the social equity listening tour and other planning spaces. Ongoing partnership with community-based organizations who really are the brokers of trust for us, certainly for public agencies as well. Transparent communication of how community members' feedback will directly connect to what will be implemented and by when. And then lastly, the development of an implementation plan that outlines cost, potential funding sources, strategies for funding, and an implementation timeline. There are so many amazing, wonderful, nuanced ideas that folks have shared with us. And really there's a deep desire to really not see it just live on paper, but to live in the streets, right? Where community members are taking public transit. So what are kind of the next steps in terms of developing an implementation plan and all? So thank you all for your time. I'm certainly open to answer questions and just really appreciate MTS's leadership in dedicating the resources to engage in these types of conversations with communities, and also the resources in terms of ensuring that there could be some immediate implementation of some of these priorities as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Monique. And so that brings us to the funding portion. I think it was important to us that at the outset, community members knew that there was going to be dollars allocated to what they said. And so as just a reminder, we allocated $3 million in capital improvement program funding to the outcomes of the effort. And so we'll get into that here. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit what our team's approach to this was after getting the initial report from Pueblo Planning, as well as just kind of the process to get us to the proposed package. So as a reminder, this is the list of the top 20 priorities that were identified in the report. And so this is the primary list that our team worked with. I'm feeling that it was best to look at the intensity of comments throughout the discussion of what was really coming up again and again for community members. Monique had mentioned they also looked at how many times out of 10 a topic was mentioned. And then we also wanted to look at, because every outreach event varied in scale and size, some had much more participation. So what were the things that regardless of the size of the group were in the top priorities? And so not surprisingly, it's also 4 items were mentioned about half the time are in the top 5. And again, that was cleanliness, treatment by bus operators, shade, and then weekend frequency. And so we took this initial report to some of our executive leadership throughout the organization, from bus operations, trolley, capital improvements, IT, because really they're the technical experts. They have to run and implement whatever programs we were to propose. And so we really needed them to be involved. And so as we looked at the list, This was some of the information that we were considering and weighing against each other. You know, I think the report and to Monique's point, it's going to go hopefully much beyond this $3 million. One of the limitations is, as you'll see, $3 million can go very quickly. And we were fairly limited. There are certain projects and programs that just weren't feasible to implement, even if they were top of the list. Something like implementing 5-minute frequency is not something we can do with $3 million. And so we did want to look at the project priority in terms of how high of a priority was it presented, but also the funding source, and really were specific items or potential projects one-time capital costs, which is where this funding is coming from, versus ongoing operational costs that would require additional funding year over year. We also wanted to look at the impact to riders. So like Monique said, you know, were investments going to be in the communities where we were really doing outreach, and also the number of riders that could potentially be impacted. Another question was staff capacities. So would projects be able to be implemented with current staff capacities, or would we need to expand staffing needs to keep up with it? And along with that, with maintenance. So are these things going to be feasible for us to sustain over time? And then again, time to implementation. You know, we hope that that responses can be seen sooner than later. And so what we did is we did the presentation to those staff, gave them the list and asked them to come up. We had, as a smaller team of us that had worked on the project throughout, had come up with an initial draft list of ideas that we thought could fit within those categories, but asked them to come up and then to submit cost estimates and project proposals outlining how much do they think this would be? Is it feasible? Is it sustainable? What would be the challenges and benefits of that? And so what we did is we took this same chart that you saw, some of the outcomes and findings from the report, this process, and then the draft project ideas to the Community Advisory Committee, and sent out information to people for whom we had emails from the community-based outreach effort to provide feedback then on, hey, of these initial project ideas, what would be your highest priorities? And so from there, you can see here in this second round of outreach, once we started giving people specific projects that could be funded for this, shelters and benches and lighting really rose to the top from that group. I will say that this represents about 10% of the people who participated overall. So it is a smaller sample size compared to the original outreach. So we'll keep that in mind. But again, you know, shelters and benches is something that had been up there, you know, in the original report and here again. Lighting, which, as you'll recall, if you've been a part of the discussions at public security or with some of our public safety group outreach, again, lighting is coming up again and again as, again, like Monique alluded to, it's really a safety factor too. Trees and urban forestry, cleanliness equipment, and then other rounded out the top 5. In that other category, 6 of those were requests for restrooms, and then the others were a mix of more pronto payments, increased frequency, and signage. And then some of the other projects that people were asked to consider were beautification projects, you know, Wi-Fi on vehicles, Wi-Fi at stations, USB port outlet options, community art grants. And so as we look at the $3 million, this is the proposed project funding to start. And so really what you see at the top there, because bus shelters, and bus shelters also provide lighting and seating. So it covers a couple of needs, but that really rose to the top, you know, I think consistently throughout the outreach and across the system. And so we're proposing to dedicate over half of the funding to expanding bus shelter access. So it's about $1.7 million would be allocated to install 35 new shelters at stations. One thing I will note here, And I think this isn't well known, but obviously you have to meet certain requirements to install a bus stop. There has to be a certain level of amenity space. And so often the most expensive and cost prohibitive part of that process is the design, permitting, and construction to even make a bus stop eligible to receive a shelter. And so 27 of these would be locations that need that construction upgrade to be eligible for it. And so we think that this is a worthwhile investment. The next two are, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on where these are located next to. The next is our two lighting projects. So again, with lighting coming up quite frequently, we have a proposal to do upgraded lighting on the platform shelters and parking lots along 7 Orange Line stations. So this was one that our trolley team identified would really benefit. Again, safety along the Orange Line has come up, and even our staff have communicated some safety concerns along the Orange Line. And so have identified from the trolley side of things that investing about $450,000 in those locations between Barrio Logan and Lemon Grove. And then the next one is actually a pilot program. So currently MTS does not maintain any lighting system outside of what's on shelters. Any other lighting near stops is city or jurisdiction owned. And so what we would like to do is pilot a program at approximately 24 bus stops to start with bus blade mounted or pole mounted solar lighting units that would be attached just to our poles, so we're not infringing on any right of way, and to test those out to see how they perform for possible expansion throughout the system, again just to increase lighting throughout the system. The next one, it's an odd item, I realize, to see trash containers on a list of capital projects for public transit, but one of the things that really was clear is cleanliness was mentioned almost twice as often as the next most mentioned, which I think was shocking to our team. Certainly we know and deal with the cleanliness issues and have heard it, but to see it at that scale was surprising in this feedback. And one of the things and challenges that our trolley facilities team has identified is just the trash. Right now we have open trash containers at all of our stations, and they are prone to, particularly in the downtown area, a lot of dumping and emptying out. And so staff are spending a lot of time turning over those. And so what we would like to do is pilot more tamper-proof trash cans at 4 high ridership stations that increase capacity and a little bit more efficiency. So this would provide 50 trash cans, 25 side-by-side units for $250,000. And then the last one is a combination of another lighting project with a community mural and beautification project. So near the Buyer Bridge trolley station in South San Diego, there is an underpass, a bridge underpass there, which I'll share a photo of, that we would propose partnering with a local artist or community group to install a mural there for beautification, but also lighting, again, to help with making that access to the transit system feel more inviting and safe. So these are just examples of what the trash cans look like. These can be wrapped with, advertisements or, marketing materials, but these are, I believe, solar powered as well. So they're higher capacity and they're self-compacting. So they're more efficient. And then they also provide the option for staff to have a dashboard that actually shows them how full it is, so that staff don't have to, go out and wonder. They know when it's getting close to capacity or if they can spend their time in other ways. The second image is an example of what one of the solar topped bus pole lighting is. Again, there's a couple of different vendors. And that's one thing I should mention, actually. Sorry, let me go back. This totals just over $2.7 million. So we have just under a 10% contingency in there, because at this time, this is all estimates. Because of the scale of these projects, we do expect these will have to go out to competitive bid process. So there may be slight changes in the pricing, and I believe that the vast majority of these would have to come back contracts to the board for approval. So the second image again, there is an example of what the pole mounted solar light projects could look like. And then the third image there is an example, is the image of the underpass nearby, or that we would be proposing to do an art project on, as well as install lighting. This image here that you see is the location. And again, I apologize, it's hard to get our entire system on one screen. And this is actually just about half of our service area. But this is the location of the 35 bus stops that our team has identified for shelters. We looked at a combination of high ridership stations, as well as just high priority locations in communities. We were doing outreach that would be good candidates for bus shelters. And so these are the 35. Our team cross-referenced these against SB 535, which is the state's definition of disadvantaged communities, AB 1550 that discusses, climate investments in disadvantaged communities, and then the Justice 40 initiative from the White House that is also about clean investments in disadvantaged communities. And so just over 2/3 of these locations meet SB 535 requirements, and then 33 out of 35 of the other ones meet the AB 1550 and Justice 40, just for reference. So you'll see we have a handful of locations in Chula Vista, a handful of National City, a few in Barrio Logan. A lot of them are invested in Southeast San Diego communities, and then again up in the City Heights area. The specific stop locations have been posted on the project page so that people can see the exact stop ID and cross streets of those as well. And then this is the other two location-based investment proposals on the trolley system. So again, we're proposing to install the trash cans at 12th and Imperial through 5th Avenue, so at Park and Market City College, and then into downtown. And then the lighting would be at the stations between Barrio Logan and Lemon Grove. So 25th and Commercial, 32nd and Commercial, 47th Street, Euclid, 62nd, Massachusetts, and Lemon Grove. And then again, because this is an estimate, we may have extra funding. And so the team's also identified other projects that we could have as, priorities, the next in line, or hold funding for continued investment. And these are all tentative projects, which is why we have hold funding for them. So the first one you see there is that currently the Environmental Health Coalition is looking at a grant for the transformative climate communities. And that grant includes a lot of different investments, but a part of that grant is for bus shelter improvements and upgrades, specifically in Barrio Logan. And so should that grant not be successful or only partially successful, we would like to reserve some funding if they don't receive funding through the grant to invest in those bus shelter or stop upgrades that the community identifies. Again, the list of potential stops has not been identified, so these are rough estimates. The second one is the Bayer Boulevard Pathway Beautification Project. So that is a joint grant between MTS and Casa Familiar for the Clean California Local Grant Program. And in this case, this would be funding if that grant is successful. MTS would provide 25% matching dollars. Right now, that project is right about $2 million total. So to reserve funding should that grant be successful. And then again, to expand the bus stop lighting project. So we would like to do a pilot program of that, give our team some time to see and get some feedback on that, and then possibly, construct the contract so that we would reserve the right to purchase twice as many as the original procurement. This is just a photo of the space next to the Bayer Boulevard trolley station that is part of that grant for the beautification project. And so it includes concrete repair for pedestrian and bike access, some lighting, landscaping, community art. And so that's what, if that grant's successful, funding would go towards that project. So with that, the staff recommendation is that the MTS Executive Committee forward to the Board of Directors a recommendation on allocation of funding for the social equity listening tour, finding as follows: approximately $1.7 million for bus shelter upgrades, approximately $450,000 for the Orange Line lighting project, approximately $120,000 for bus stop solar lighting project, approximately $250,000 for upgraded trash receptacles at downtown trolley stations, and approximately $200,000 for the Buyer Bridge underpass lighting and mural project. And so with that, Monique and I are happy to take any questions.
Thank you both for the presentation and for all of the work that you have put into this. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. We have several. Manny Rodriguez, please make your way to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Monique Lopez and staff here at MTS for doing a really great project. It was really fascinating how they went out and listened to the community. They did really good engagement, outreach work, and we appreciate how they collaborated with other CBOs. As Monique said, gain the trust of the community. I would like to speak in favor of the recommendations, not only made by the MTS staff, but the ones made by Monique, as well, to continue to build partnerships into these communities and don't just make it a one and done effort, but continue cultivating a relationship. To that extent of this not being just a one and done, I would like to, propose to the board to adopt a equity action plan that will detail how these recommendations will be implemented. And secondly, a commitment to equity from the MTS board. We think this will really help operationalize equity and keep it in mind in all of MTS's planning and projects. So a commitment to equity and an equity action plan. And thank you once again to Monique and MTS staff. That's my comment.
Next is Randy Torres Van Vleck. Please make your way to the podium.
Good morning, Executive Committee members and staff. My name is Randy Torres Van Vleck. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning at the City Heights Community Development Corporation. We appreciate the opportunity to work with MTS, Pueblo Planning, I Am Green, El Cajon Collaborative, the Arc of San Diego, Casa Familiar as partners for this project. I'd like to also thank Environmental Health Coalition at Mid-City CAN for working with us to organize 2 listening sessions in City Heights. We had over 130 people join us for those. We appreciate MTS committing $3 million for immediate improvements that'll address priorities from this project. The shelters, the trash cans, the beautification, the lighting that Stacy laid out and displayed here will create safer and more dignified transit experiences for our communities. But we know that we need to go beyond that. The San Diego Transportation Equity Working Group, a group of community-based orgs working in San Diego, developed a set of recommendations for next steps. We'd like to see an equity action plan, as Manny mentioned, that defines what equity means to the agency, what that commitment looks like, while also charting out how recommendations from the social equity listening tour will be implemented. We hope to see the agency commit to the 10 Transit Lifelines, which is a platform developed through over a decade of engagement in environmental justice communities. And a few of those lifelines include the Youth Opportunity Pass, a 10-minute frequency and 24-hour service in high demand areas, and restroom access. And that also ties into dignified transit experience, which is a big theme of the SELT. And then finally, utilizing CalEnviroScreen as a criteria to inform route planning and capital projects. So we appreciate that, and we hope to have your support next steps for the Equity Action Plan. Thanks again for leadership of Pueblo and MTS for committing to this tour. Appreciate it.
Leif Gensert, please unmute yourself now.
Hi, my name is Leif and I live in North Park, and I want to speak in support of these recommendations that have been brought forward. And it is great to see that these issues that concern the community of San Diego are applicable universally. When I talk to other people, my friends, who are definitely better off than most of these people in these interviews, they ask for the same things: more cleanliness, higher frequency, better weekend service. So I absolutely support these recommendations.
The original DRA, please unmute yourself now.
I guess I have some questions because it seems a little bit absurd to be spending about $48,464.29 each shelter upgrade. And you guys are only talking to certain areas because you have to do that under all of your bills and different things that you want to follow. But if you guys want everybody to be riding public transit, and we're not supposed to be walking or driving, but walking or biking or riding the transit that you guys provide, you should be spreading that out to everybody and not just certain demographics. You should be equitable in that, because it isn't. And you're talking about social equity listening tour, but you're going to designated areas. You're not just going all over the place. And $250,000 on trash can containers. What happens when there's no sun? I mean, are these going to have batteries so that they continue to work? It just seems a little bit ridiculous when you could add more trash cans probably to more areas. And then this is going to have to be something where, what if the compactor stops working? Then all of a sudden you don't even have the trash cans. It seems like you guys want to cause more issues than you are trying to help. And if you guys want us all to be riding, you need to be equitable in talking to everybody, and putting these in areas all over the place. Maybe you need to spend more money expanding your service areas instead of buying trash cans that are compacting and are solar, you know, because this is the people's money. So if you guys have a plan for us to be doing that, then you need to be thinking about that as well. You know, it's, I don't know, I think you guys just love to spend the people's money and not really ask everybody, you know, their opinion on it. But whatever, that's your guys' game. Thanks.
Alejandro Amador, please unmute yourself now.
Good morning. My name is Alejandro Amador and I'm with Casa Familiar. I first want to thank Monique and the partnering orgs for the work that was done on this listening tour, and also thank MTS for taking the first step towards an equitable implementation, because this is equity, giving a voice to the people who have not had a voice historically. So yeah, today we're asking you to approve the social equity listening tour recommendations. This tour spotlighted a process of inclusivity and community-led prioritizations of projects and investments. And we're excited to see the implementation of community priorities within our public transit system, and hope that this is not just an isolated effort, but a precedent for future prioritization of funding. I also want to ask you to use this report and other readily available data, such as Canvas screen, to designate and prioritize project spending in the communities that need it the most. Thank you.
It includes public comment, Vice Chair.
Thank you. All right, let's go to board discussion, and we'll start with Member Hall.
Okay, and I'm going to echo what the lady said about the equity. We need to have equity to East County, and by East County I mean anywhere from Spring Valley to Poway. I don't think, you know, you did one in El Cajon, but no, you didn't do anything in Poway, you didn't do anything in Alpine, you didn't do anything in Santee, you didn't do anything in Spring Valley, as I can see. So I would like a list of who you tracked and how you tracked it. The problem I always see with MTS and Sandag is they don't go east of 15. And that's part of our problem with these counties. We just don't feel that you guys ever go east of 15. How many of these projects are going east of 15? And why aren't they? That's a question.
Yeah, you know, I think it was a challenge that we acknowledged with Monique at the beginning, that there is an element to equity where you are trying to work with communities who have, you know, historically been disadvantaged, and trying to level the playing field. And that can look like a lot of different things. So I think a lot in East County, service frequency, is something where you have less service frequency in East County. And that's something that was presented in the report. Unfortunately, we're not funding service, but
So you agree that there's no equity in East County, but you're not putting any money into it.
I wouldn't say.
If I could, Stacy.
Yeah.
Ron, I'd like to ask Beverly Neff to stand up and come to the podium. I warned her ahead of time I would do this. To talk about why we chose the locations for the shelters, and then also the other aspects of how we do our shelter program, because these aren't the only shelters that we're going to be
And I'm
building.
okay with all that. Don't get me wrong. I actually will probably support this. My point is more the fact that it's time that East County is actually acknowledged, for a better word. And that's what I'm trying to get. So go ahead.
But Beverly, start by explaining who puts in shelters in a lot of these communities
Okay,
and
so,
manages the shelter program.
okay, for the shelter program specifically, we have a MOU with certain cities, the city of San Diego, Chula Vista, National City. The cities of El Cajon and Poway specifically maintain their own shelter programs. They received TDA funding from MTS, and they purchase and maintain their own shelters. So these locations were focused more around the locations where we already have agreements with the various cities. We looked at zip codes that had the highest complaints or requests for furniture. We looked at those zip codes and then identified the higher ridership locations. And like Stacy mentioned, we looked at, was it SB 535, AB 1550, and then Justice 40 to make sure that they met and fell within that criteria.
Again, I still go back to that. I would like a list of when you interviewed people, did you ask their zip code?
People generally shared where they were coming from. I know that for our engagement in Southeastern community, we did get a number of folks from Spring Valley and from East County who were, and I think you heard it also in the video too, who were specifically, asking for more transit frequency out to Spring Valley as far as Hamul as well. But we did not ask people, it was more anecdotal. We did not ask people for addresses, like physical addresses or zip, but we did ask people generally where they would be coming from or where they most frequently ride transit.
Okay, but I think in the future, you should be asking zip code because at that point we can identify really where they're coming from. And again, this isn't to down the system. This is just to bring up a point that in our opinion in East County, everything goes to the blue line or everything goes to different areas. You're actually going to put something on the orange line, which I'm happy about. The security on the orange line, that's going to be your biggest complaint. You know it and I know it.
Yeah, and where we did engage the majority of folks from East County, as I mentioned, was and also more rural as well, was intentionally the El Cajon Transit Station. Actually, pretty much exclusively was folks coming from deeper east. And we were really intentional of engaging. We're also looking for locations too that we can meet a greater amount of folks, just, in terms of density and all. And so that was one of the things that was identified.
Fully understand, but you didn't get zip codes, so we have no idea where they're really from. And you didn't talk to Poway. Poway's over here, all they are is a check for this place. And that they're always ignored. And I'm the squeaky wheel, so Santee gets a lot of attention. But the reality is this needs, we need to start include equities for everybody, and we need to make sure equity is for everybody. And frankly, the problem is East County, again, it's not even acknowledged at this point. If anything east of the 15 isn't even acknowledged. So I apologize. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Member Hall. Member Ela Rivera.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So first, thank you, Monique. I just want to, every time that you've had an opportunity to present here, I really appreciate it. I think about kind of the transformation or evolution of this agency. I think it's really important to note that the work that we see here in the listening tour is largely work that you've done before in a different way. And in the past, it often had to be the same folks from the community kind of forcing their way into the conversation. And in this respect, the door was opened to listening to community. And I think that that's really important. And I want to appreciate Sharon for you being the leader of the agency who's opened the door and not made it so hard for Monique to have to kind of knock it down in order to have these perspectives heard. I think the intentionality and creativity that you approach these processes with is incredibly important and gives us a really good window into how folks really feel. And Randy said this as well, there's a theme that I see across what folks were asking for, and that's dignity in when they ride. And we heard it from one of the public commenters as well, because that is an overarching human desire. Anything that we invest in that enhances the dignity of ridership is going to be something that improves the system for everyone and makes it more attractive to everyone. And so I think that I raise that because oftentimes these conversations around equity can devolve into a conversation that makes it seem like only certain folks are benefiting and others are losing. But these investments that are recommended here would improve experiences for many, many people. And not just, I want to go a little bit further because I think the equity plan is an interesting idea. And I'm curious to what extent MTS plans to incorporate the feedback from the listening tour into not just these specific projects, but how we approach the budget process and other opportunities over the next year or two.
So for us, we don't see this as a one and done. And certainly we were putting some extra money into the next CIP, for instance, to continue these kinds of projects. But I also don't see this as it's just a piece in the puzzle of how we're approaching our customers and how we're approaching the communities we're serving. We have also done, as we've brought to you, the customer surveys, the other outreach efforts. Right now, there's an onboard passenger survey being done on our behalf by Sandag. All of these things we're coalescing together to understand better how we can improve our service to the communities. So while this currently is being proposed to fund in areas where they have historically been under served and underinvested in, we also have other metrics we use to determine where we're putting our other resources. For instance, service frequency is going to go where it's needed most. So demand and supply. We're not going to overinvest in an area where we know we're not going to carry anybody at the detriment of the rest of the network. And so those are other kinds of things that we will always mesh together with an effort like we've done with this social equity listening tour. The social equity listening tour came out of a feeling that we as an agency needed to be introspective about how we are approaching these communities where through no fault of MTS, they've been underserved for decades by, investment by government agencies. And so we're a small part of that. One of the speakers mentioned that these bus stops improvements are very expensive. Well, it's because those areas have been so uninvested in. It might be dirt on the side of the road where we're now going to have to improve it into a bus pad that's ADA accessible. And so those are the kinds of things that we want to be intentional in thinking about as we figure out where we're going to invest our funds. But overall, it's just one part of how we determine what we're going to invest our resources.
Thank you. And then I want to say thank you to Stacy and Beverly for the work that you've done with your comments here today. One question about the bus shelter stop upgrades. Is there an opportunity to consider potted trees being incorporated into part of those upgrades. I know that the University of Minnesota did some research years back, and there was feedback that trees near bus stops improves wait time perception, and the frustrations and concerns around pollution and traffic doesn't necessarily need to be particularly expensive, and can, I would imagine, be incorporated into some of these shelter upgrades. Is there an opportunity to do that as you're looking for proposals here?
We could definitely look into that. The challenge is that large tree canopies kind of interfere with the safety of the bus. So we have to keep them to a minimum near the bus stops so that we don't have to constantly cut them down.
Right.
But we can certainly look at incorporating it.
Thank you. The last thing I wanted to say, and Councilor Hall, I appreciate where you're coming from on this. I will acknowledge that oftentimes East County does get dismissed as in terms of the levels of poverty, the level of diversity that exists in East County. I think that those are often ignored. And I think that what I hope we can avoid is approaching conversations around equity from this scarcity mindset, where it always feels like it's going to need to be one community in need versus another. And it does not have to be that way when it comes to our transit system or just in general. We live in the most well-resourced, wealthy society in the history of the world. And it should not be the case that every time we want to do something to lift up those who have been left behind, it feels like it's at the detriment of others who are being or have been left behind as well. And I see opportunity here if and this is a MTS and Sandag conversation as well. If we unite around lifting up the transit system in a way that works for all people, and just to be blunt, if East County leadership engages in that effort in such a way that is helping the community harness the resources to invest in that system, it doesn't have to be this scarcity conversation. It can be in a conversation that starts from a place of abundance. We know that there are folks who depend on the transit system in East County, and that it's extremely difficult, onerous for them to use. So I am no more interested in seeing folks in East County suffer than I am in seeing folks in the South Bay suffer. But I just want it to be known that by identifying one group as having been intentionally left behind in the past, that does not in any way dismiss the needs of another community. And I hope that when we have these conversations, just know that I don't think it has to be from this scarcity mindset, and there is an opportunity, but it's going to require all of us as leaders going to the community and saying, we need more resources to invest in this system. And once that happens, rather than fighting over crumbs, which is oftentimes what it feels like in these equity conversations, we can actually start from a place of, here are the resources that we need in order to address everyone's needs, and let's make the investments accordingly. So I just wanted to name that part, because I hope that I don't know anyone who fights for equity who wants to see anyone left behind. I have operated in that space for a long time. Never have I heard anyone say, it's important to me to lift my community up and shove another community down. And they will say, because we know these communities were intentionally cut out of investment in the past. And so it's important to reach back, help lift them up. And that does not need to be at the detriment of anyone else. So I appreciate the patience and letting me speak to that part. I again want to thank Sharon for your leadership here, because it is super important to me to see Monique in that chair presenting in this way, knowing the work that she's done over the years and how hard, Monique, you had to fight in order to bring community into this space, and oftentimes be ignored. And when you were successful, I think this part should be noted as well. When Monique was successful in having her opinions heard, the whole agency benefited. And we are still incorporating some of the work that you did, that you started years back. So anyway, I think that that's super important. I wanted to acknowledge that part on both ends here because it's important to me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Member Elo Rivera. We're going to go to Member Moreno, and then we'll go back to Member Hall.
Wonderful. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for the presentation and for the report. I found it quite illuminating, so thank you for, how long did this take?
The process overall, I think, took about 9 months, and then there was some time while MTS was working internally in terms of identifying these priorities for the $3 million. So about a 9-month process.
Wonderful, thank you. Of the top 12 priorities mentioned most frequently, 6 of them are what we refer to as transit amenities, cleanliness of transit stops and vehicles, shades at transit stops, Wi-Fi, electric outlets, access to restrooms, and lighting. The other top priorities have to do with transit frequency, service for homeless riders, the youth opportunity passes, and treatment by bus drivers. This is very similar to what I often hear from residents of District 8. They want to see the basics taken care of first, just simple investments to improve the overall transit experience, right? Notice the contrast between the priorities of our customers and the transit priorities most often discussed regionally. For instance, did any study participant mention the need to connect the trolley to the airport? If so, how many?
None.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think there's wisdom to be found in the priorities of our existing riders. Many people who don't usually use transit, but then take a survey online or over the phone about transit priorities might say that connecting the trolley to the airport should be a high priority. But if these same people were to actually try to use the transit system, my bet is that their priorities would become similar to those in this study. They would want frequency, they would want reliable services, that it be clean and that it be secure and just, basic amenities. Don't get me wrong. I do support connecting the trolley to the airport, as well as a lot of other projects that are often mentioned, but I think it makes sense for us to listen to the voices of our current customers and explore what it would take to meet their demands. I think most people in the business world say you get business from people who are already doing business with you, right? So that's something that I wanted to point out. Did we look at how much it would cost to upgrade bus stops with shelters and benches and a trash can, just overall? Also to provide restrooms for transit riders at more locations, the Wi-Fi. I think we should probably know how much this would cost us before we decide that we can't afford it. So I'll let you answer.
Yeah, so with the bus stop shelter upgrades, our current model of shelters, which are solar powered, do include trash and recycling, lighting, seating, shelters. So I think the cost there will include all of those amenities for them.
But I mean, for our whole system, did we look at a holistic view of the whole system and how much would it actually cost?
We haven't. I think to Beverly's point, part of our service area is not managed by MTS, but this is the cost for 30. I think we have several thousand stops in the system. I don't know if Sharon has more.
It was just a question, and I think that the answer is no, we didn't.
Yeah,
right.
no.
So I don't mean to go any deeper than that, which we'll get to a point that I have. I think while providing amenities like this it will definitely cost money. I think it will be a tiny fraction of the cost of projects like connecting the trolley to the airport or creating the purple line. And I think these things can be done a lot quicker. Considering that half of the top priorities identified by the social equity listening tour concerns transit amenities, I think it behooves us, and I think it's a time to reconsider an existing policy that we have, which is the transit amenity policy, which is it's very limited on the number and types of amenities that MTS provides. But I think it definitely would be an answer to what a lot of folks talked about. Is this going to be a one and done thing, right? Which I don't disagree with what is proposed here. I think this is it's a way better start than what I ever dreamed of, right? As an MTS board member, but I think if we want to really make a change in the direction that this board is going, that we should absolutely take a look at open up our transit amenity policy. I would love to see this be brought to the board for a discussion on how we can actually create a plan to improve the transit amenities identified by our social equity listening tour. Whether you want it at the budget committee or you want it at executive committee, I don't think that really much matters. But I think it will address the concerns that that some of my colleagues have here. And that would not be we like to always say and or, right? That's not in lieu of what is recommended, but I think that that we definitely need to bring this policy forward. And I want to know if staff would be committed to bringing it forward.
Yeah, overall, we were going to look at all of our board policies over the course of the next couple of years, but we could certainly elevate that one to front end if you wanted to see that happen.
Thank you. I think obviously it's up to the vice chair, but I think this is a great place. If you would prefer it to be a budget committee, we don't meet until September or next year. I don't know. So, but we're happy to have a meeting. The other thing that I just kind of, it kind of, I call it my spidey senses here. Most of the upgrades that are associated with the blue line, if you will, are tied to grants. Did I get that right? Or did I?
So the first one, the Buyer Bridge underpass, would just be self-funded. And then there is one other project, that is pending,
Tied to the
grant
PCC
outcome.
funding? Okay, hey, you guys, you haven't heard it in the budget, but you guys have heard it in the budget. If we can get it from somewhere else, absolutely, let's do it and let's continue pushing, right? And I know that these lists are really important because I think these are lists that will help us drive the discussion at the state with Senator Wiener's bill. And it would really highlight the fact that we are focused on equity, right? But at the same time, we're looking at the whole system, because I agree, the whole system needs to be revamped or needs to be looked at least. But I thank you for the effort. I thank you for bringing this up. As I said, we get business from existing business. That's kind of a business model. Not that we are a business, but I think this definitely, that comment pertains to this agency right now. But thank you guys, and thank you to staff. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Moreno. Let's go back to Member Hall.
Yeah, I just want to bring up, I completely agree with you on that we have to work together and that we have to help each other on that one. All I'm asking is when the time comes, if you look at the 5 big moves from Sandag, take a good look at it again. From the 15 east, we're getting an extra carpool lane, and that's about all we're getting on that. So yes, that's in problems right now. So when you see East County, North County kind of arguing over certain things, you have to look at the overall, where all the money is going, where all the work is going. And that's all I'm asking is people take a look at it. And most people go, oh, wait, great, I get this, I get this, I get this. But nobody says, well, gee, Alpine doesn't get anything, or Poway doesn't get anything. Or, Spring Valley is, we have a lot of areas that need equity in East County. Lakeside, parts of Lakeside are real poor, then you got parts of it up the hill that are even worse. So there are a lot of areas that are there. If you take a 4-hour bus ride to come into San Diego, it ain't equitable. And again, it isn't going to be helpful, but so that's all I'm asking is please look at all these things coming up. Five big moves are a good example. But yes, I agree. And if you need a motion, I'll make that motion to pass those through. That shows you how I'm being equitable.
Thank you, Member Hall. We have a motion. Is there any further board discussion? Member Bush.
Yes, and I'll second the motion for discussion, but I'd really like to thank and commend Monique Lopez, Pueblo Planning, all the CBOs who are part of this report. For me, and having been in this industry, in this line of work for at least last 10 years, this is the single most comprehensive, intentional, and informative report on community outreach I've ever seen. It's human. It's done with love. That was very clear. It brings about uncomfortable topics, conversations. I really appreciate how you speak and talk about the unhoused, those that have housing insecurity, the homeless, as we say, and that was intentional, right? Just our language and how we refer to things. I appreciate that. And listening to them asking for a more dignified transit experience. Your story about the juvenile detention center and that mother trying to get connected to see her daughter not being able to, that's powerful. And those stories we need to, I hope we all absorb and we listen to those stories and we take heart to them. So thank you so much. Just amazing report. I really want to give a special shout out and thank you to Sharon for your leadership on this, for hiring Monique and this process and your staff as well, Stacy, all of the MTS staff who worked on this, just incredible job. And I think this report, I hope that it's a kind of a template and model for how we do outreach and come up with projects and programs. There were a lot of priorities identified. We all know that we have limited and likely shrinking resources, but to get to Member Elo Rivera's point, which I really appreciate, we do need to operate out of this scarcity mindset. Yes, let's be realistic about the resources and limited resources that only MTS has, but let's change the conversation, Member Hall, which your response to your comments, which I appreciate. But when you came at this aggressively, just right out the door. And I appreciate that. I think that you are being responsive and representative of your community in East County that does lack access to transit. But just how you even just came at this and talking about the 5 big moves, that's not even part of this conversation. So I get there's other things happening, but then let's have a conversation, right? Let's work together. Show us what East County, what your residents in Santee, what their issues are, what some of the stories are, because one of the things that you criticized was that this report didn't reach out to the rural communities. It's right here. And I really, and to be honest, I did not get through all of the reports. I'm just about half or a third of the way through. It's a big comprehensive report. It's amazing. I still gotta go through it in detail, but it's right here on page 15 of the report, rural communities, and how the reason they selected El Cajon, because they have limited resources too, right? So if we want to identify, if you have ideas on identifying more areas where we should do outreach, let's bring them. And then let's also provide those resources so they can really do that outreach to those places. But the rural communities, Jacumba, Route 891, they all connect to El Cajon. So that made sense to me why that they would do that. And I really appreciate that level of outreach. But if you have ideas, bring them. Let's like, I think this is a starting point. And let's push forward and do more on that outreach. So appreciate your comments, but then let's work together, not operate from that scarcity mindset. We also, I think, need help. Us as cities, I think we need to do more to support MTS. And so I'm speaking even for me, representing National City, being National City, I think the city of National City, we should be more intentional about working with city staff. And cleanliness was identified as one of the top priorities. So maybe we in the city of National City should be redirecting our staff resources to those trolley areas, right? Or more police, more of our police department to help out with security. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think I would say the same hopefully for the city of Santee, the city of San Diego. I think all of us need to also just work together and help MTS with some of these issues. A couple just questions or concerns. So I'm curious, so what I see on the recommendation list, so I seconded it for discussion, but what I'm concerned with is cleanliness was identified as the #1 priority. When I look at this, I see a disconnect for me. I think a lot of these solutions seem to be passive and not necessarily addressing directly the cleanliness. So yes, we can add a trash can here, but then and put more trash cans. And there was a resident that I think had about concerns about the expense of the trash cans and the receptacles. But then is that really that alone is going to just, if it's not necessarily it's this mindset, I feel like if you build it, they'll come. And I think more needs to be done, like programmatic. So my question is, what can we do to increase? Can we use any of the CIP money for maintenance, for staffing, or cleanliness? Because cleanliness I see as an issue, and the other big issue that's missing from the CIPs, there's nothing here that I saw in bathrooms unless I missed it.
So I should have probably prefaced this whole discussion with the fact that we're not just looking at CIP. This is just using CIP money. So there's only certain aspects of it that you can use for.
So we can't, none on maintenance.
But what we've taken is this whole discussion and looked at areas. For instance, there was complaints about the way our bus drivers treat the passengers. That is something separate that we're dealing with on the operations side of the house. The cleanliness issue, we already knew this from our customer survey. And we were already working towards increasing porter service on the trolley. Trolley is where they're concerned about it. I mean, let's face it, the bus stops, that's one thing. They have some concern about that. That's taken care of by our shelter program. But with the trolley, that's where we get the most complaints about cleanliness. And so we have increased the amount of service that we put out there with our janitorial contractor. So that I'm just telling you that we have some operational things that are in this report, the frequencies and things like that, the weekend service, the night service, all that has to be taken care of in the operations budget, not.
Cannot
CIP.
CBIP, we can't touch that. Okay, got it. So, but for bathrooms, I didn't see anything on bathrooms, so like proposed here. So what, I mean, were Pueblo Planning and the 5 CBOs engaged in reviewing and identifying these projects?
They were sent the information when we did the webinar discussion. So I'd have to go back and look at the participant list, but when we send out the webinar discussion, that did include CBO leads, as well as everyone who provided an email address who participated at it to give us feedback on the proposed projects and provide input. And the 6 restroom comments requests that came from the other category were all part of the community advisory committee, I believe, effort, which there is some overlap there. Again, I'd have to go back and look, but there is some overlap between the CBOs that participated in the community advisory committee. I think from restrooms, we did look at it. I think all of these don't have very high operational commitments. And I think restrooms, the last figure we looked at was like over $250,000 a year in operating costs for like a portable restroom unit. So that was, I believe, part of the logic is that it's more operational than capital.
And I just want to add, kind of separate from this, we've been hearing, about restrooms and the need for it from the board consistently. So, that is something that all of our new TOD negotiations that are underway, we are talking with the TOD developer about, the possibility and the options and basically saying what we want a restroom for passengers. We also are talking that separately of identifying if that TOD location is appropriate for a employee break room restroom for some of our bus operators or trolley operators. But so that's been added into all of those normal discussions. That's a much longer process, to plan a development, ultimately see something built, but we're asking them to figure out if their funding mechanism can incorporate both the construction and or the operation and how we can do that. And then we are working with the school in National City to open the 24th Street restroom. So we have a lot of other efforts we're doing to see if we can address the restroom issue outside of this. You know, I think we all recognize it's a big issue and hard to tackle. But I didn't want to make it seem like we're just not doing anything on restrooms. There are other things going on at the agency to try to address that.
Okay, understood. Is there an opportunity with this, before this goes for final approval, is there opportunity to adjust this list so that we could look and increase funding for restrooms?
What I'm trying to figure out what it is you're asking, because
Can we use this money to
you'd
put in
like
more
you'd like us
bathrooms?
to take the 3 million and build a bathroom instead?
No, Sharon, I'm not asking you to spend 3 million on a bathroom. I'm asking, can any of this money be used for bathrooms, for putting bathrooms?
Yes, you could supplant some of these other projects and direct us to look at a putting in a restroom somewhere.
Yeah, so it's not, but again, it's not one restaurant. It's just looking at, I feel like that restrooms need to be more part of every conversation, and restrooms seem to be excluded from this conversation. And given that based on this social equity listening tour, cleanliness was the #1 priority. And I think part of cleanliness is bathrooms too, is a big part of it. I just think that we should look at that. I don't want to kind of micromanage you all on staff on exactly where the placement is. I think you guys have been doing, as Karen said, some really good work on identifying the opportunities like in TODs and 24th Street. But I just see that as missing right now. So that's my comments for now.
Okay, thank you, Member Bush. Member Ela Rivera.
Thank you. Just to kind of one recommendation I might have, I think, is Sharon, to your point that this isn't the only opportunity to address these issues. This is coming to the full board. And so perhaps when that comes to us, the other ways that the recommendations are incorporated into into our proposed budget, that might help us see the way that the broader recommendations are being addressed, the way the full list of recommendations are being addressed by MTS's broader investments. And supplemental to that is strategies like the utilization of our TODs, because I think as it currently stands, we've got, I believe, one on the orange line that that's correct, right? I think it's orange line, the La Mesa development. And that was a condition.
Yes, so we're under negotiation right now, our El Cajon, Spring Street. We ultimately will be entering into negotiations for Palomar and 24th Street under AB 1486. We have the 12th and Imperial Expansion Center projects that are already underway, that it's not a requirement of their DDA, is the Buyer Boulevard in Rancho Bernardo. Palm Avenue is already under a DDA. It's not a requirement, but they're also making lots of design changes. So I think there's potentially an opening for us to talk about one.
Got it. So yeah, I guess just the recommendation is that when this is brought forward to the board, that the broader strategy to address the recommendations from the listening tour kind of be listed out more comprehensively, because I think it's challenging for us to see the full list of recommendations. I recognize that these funds come from a specific bucket, but if we can kind of see it all together, I think that help us see the way that you all are looking at the big picture in terms of, again, responding to what was recommended from the listening tour, as well as some of the repeated requests from the board. The last question I had, because I think Stacy brought up sponsorship opportunities. Is that something that you looked into already, or is it just a concept right now?
You mean for the trash cans?
Trash cans or any of the other capital projects? I think there's a multitude of opportunities there with the shelters, with the trash cans.
Yeah, we haven't yet. So any shelters that get installed, I believe would be part of our existing advertising, process. They have the advertising panels on them. So those would, stay in that process. We haven't looked at what it would look like, for, selling space at the trash cans, just because we haven't picked the final product yet. But, that is something that we would look at, when, if and when the time comes to look at revenue that could be generated from wrapping those.
Okay, my final recommendation here would be that as we think about the revenue conversation that we've had on a number of occasions and sponsorship opportunities, to me, the equity investments represent a kind of unique and perhaps even separate opportunity for sponsorship. There might be folks who are more willing to invest in these equity investments, and in doing so allow us to enhance or do even more specifically for these equity investments. I think that the work that Monique has done to engage community provides a compelling reason for someone to step up and invest in these recommendations, since they've come from community and would be so beneficial for community. I've already talked a lot on this item. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Elo Rivera. Member Bush.
Yeah, just, I would like to amend my motion if the maker, Member Hall, is open to this. I would like us to look at adopting an equity action plan. I appreciate that recommendation from City Heights CDC. Also determining what does equity look like, and us defining that and including rural and I don't know if we want to start getting down the path of addressing geography like say East County. So that's why I say rural. But I think that we should take another look at addressing Member Hall, your concerns with that and what the issues are. And I'd also like to direct staff to look at opportunities for building, or is it maintaining bathrooms as part of this recommendation? I see 1.7 million for bus stop shelter upgrades, for example. I mean, that's a lot of money. Maybe some of that, I don't want to, micromanage you all and say an exact amount, but I think that should be looked at. Maybe the El Cajon Transit Center, which does connect with a lot of those rural areas. Maybe that's an opportunity for putting bathrooms in there. So
We have a bathroom in El Cajon.
okay, and it's operating, it's working, it's functioning, it's open, working.
I could check with Brian to see if it's working today. I'm assuming it's working today.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes, the restroom at El Cajon is working.
Awesome. Thank you. So I didn't know if it was there at El Cajon, so that's great. But yeah, so again, if Member Hall's open to it, I'd like to look at adopting an equity action plan, defining what that is, and looking at exploring bathrooms as part of this amount.
Would it be good to do that, or be better, Karen, to actually just make that as a separate?
Yeah, I certainly don't think that we would have something by next week.
Yeah, good point.
But ultimately, we can take this as direction to put together, to me, it might best fit as a new board policy that kind of directs staff like on how equity should be considered in our other actions. But as we flush that out, maybe it's a different document.
Okay, and that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Do we need to add that to it, or should it just make it as direction?
How about if we do this as, let me try this motion, that we have the recommendation that is in front of us here, and that we direct staff to explore developing an equity action plan inclusive of restrooms and inclusive of East County considerations.
So I think that's good. I think here's what I'm just being real about what I see though. So I don't want to hold this whole process up, but because a lot of work has gone into this, I also don't want us to rush this through. Cleanliness was identified as the #1 priority, and bathrooms continue to come up. I know they're difficult and they shouldn't just fall on MTS. Like cities, I think we should, in the county, we should invest in that too. But I think we can allocate this budget. And I still would like staff to explore, for example, that 1.7 million. I don't think all of that needs to be spent all at once. So I want some flexibility so that if in a few weeks, if in a month, to give staff their time to look at this, they can come back and say, oh, okay, here's some sites for additional restroom upgrades, or maybe it's at least for the interim porta potties. That's not the best thing, but we have our workers who need that right now. That's an issue we'll discuss later. But so I think there's stuff we could do right now. If we have this money right now, why would we put it off? That's my concern.
All right, so I understand the distinction, I think. So tell me if this captures the motion that you would like to be before the body, and that would be to adopt the recommendation proposed by staff with an evaluation of how restrooms might be incorporated into the recommendation and funding, and also to direct staff to explore developing an equity action plan inclusive of East County.
That sounds great to me, Member Hall.
It's fine. Thank you.
Okay, has that motion been captured or does it need to be restated?
It's been captured.
Okay. All right, we have a motion on the floor made by Member Hall and seconded by Member Bush. We'll go ahead and call the roll.
Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Vargas is absent. Hall,
Yes.
Moreno,
Moreno, yes.
Bush,
Yes.
Whitburn.
Yes.
The motion passes with one member absent and 6 members saying yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the great discussion, and thank you again for the staff presentation on this. We are going to move into a couple of informational items, and we're going to take them out of order and begin with item number 6. And item number 6 is in regard to a boardroom upgrade, and Ms. Outlaw is going to lead us through this presentation.
Before we get started, the reason I wanted to bring it here was to get take your temperature as to what you want to see us doing here in the boardroom. This system needs to be replaced, the audio. And that's really the most expensive, is the audio portion of this. But there are other things that we could be doing. And so the staff has gone out to a lot of different boardrooms and council rooms to see what has been done in light of the changes in the way we do board meetings after the pandemic. We wanted to bring this to you and get your sense as to what you'd like to see. So with that, Emily Outlaw. I've been to Santee. I have not been since if you've upgraded. Okay.
No, but we certainly would welcome that. We would like to go and check it out for sure. None of this obviously is finalized now, so we were just trying to get ideas and see where we could go from there. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Emily Outlaw. I'm the Chief Information Officer here. Good morning. So as Sharon mentioned, we've taken a look at a couple of different options. You're going to notice when I show you these options that there's not a huge cost difference between them because, as she mentioned, the AV system that needs to be replaced is really the bulk of the cost. So just keep that in mind as I'm going through this. Thanks. So one of our first options here would be to do an overhang of the TVs from the center area here, which would have 4 TVs facing outward so that anybody sitting around the table here would be able to look up and basically see the TVs there. In addition, this would also have sort of a side table that would be located over on the side over here so that basically all the controls that are happening right here that the clerks and everything are working on would be over on the side so as to not be in the way for all of the members sitting in the audience. And that total for this one, including all of the boardroom equipment, the installation, that's the side furniture for that, as well as fixing this wall paneling and construction, you're looking at about $340,000. Another option that we were looking at was having the TVs down on the ground. So this would be the center here. We would have the TVs. It's hard to kind of tell in this picture that they're facing
how they're facing, but if you look at the bottom piece, you can see they'd be facing kind of out, so that you could be able to look down and basically see all of the TVs from that angle. This would require us to actually cut this table down because you wouldn't be able to see it without it. So we would need to cut this down and sort of lower the height of that the table. So the total cost for this, again, including all of the equipment, the AV equipment and the all the furniture as well as construction, you're looking at about 320,000, 321,000 for this option. And the third option would be replacing or the TVs in the current system. So basically keeping it as is today, but with upgrading the televisions to be more modern. And for that, you're looking at about 310,000. In addition, we were looking at upgrading the executive conference room with just some extra TVs and a newer system, again, for sound and cameras, extra cameras. There's been a lot of complaints. It's just hard to see on the TV with just being on one wall, as well as being able to see everybody in the room. So for that, you'd be looking at 14,857. And we wanted to throw on some options too, just for discussion about the streaming capabilities. So it's not significantly more from a technology perspective in order to add live streaming. However, it probably would require 1 to 2 visual technicians if we wanted to be live doing that. So with that, I will, I guess, kind of open up. Well, I'll talk about next steps first. So we want to get your direction. And then this project is, we're looking at probably a 12 to 14 month project. It does take some time to go through the process and get the proposals. So once we get those proposals, then we can make a decision. We'll award the contract, and then it's going to take about 6 months to complete all of the work. I'm going to go back to the slide for the sake of conversation. I'll take comments.
And I wanted to add putting them in the middle here will take away this table, which we use this room not just for meetings with you, but with our all hands meetings and trainings and things like that. So it would probably cause a little bit of a disruption in that we would lose that space, but.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
All right, we will open it up to board discussion then, beginning with Member Hall.
We did this. We were able to use PEG funds and Santee, public education funds. And we were able to use that as a large amount coming in. I don't think we could use that here, but basically we have 4 big screens, which I like that idea of having the 4 big screens. I think we have 6. We have cameras there, and like I think over that way too, to come down and make it live. And the other thing we have is right in front of us. I stole this from my wife, who's on the Grossmont Healthcare District. They have, rather than these little things, they actually have monitors there. And if you made them touch screen monitors, that might be a lot easier in the long run. Because every time I do this, I go zooming out and somewhere else. But the advantage of that is the monitor's right in front of you, so you're able to look in front of you rather than, and then the public can look on the walls and they look on the walls. So we do, so we actually do have one behind us, which you probably put up there if you needed to. And so it's just some ideas to look at. If you want to come out, you just pick a day and I'll make sure somebody's there. I'll be there, 1 or 2.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, this one did include 4 cameras around the outside. So we would have that capability. And absolutely, we can, there's other options that we can do, as such as like the screens on the front. It's a matter of, what the board would really like to see. There's options, I think you guys have probably seen Sandags where they've got the digital nameplates and things like that. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can get quite fancy. It's a matter of, what the board would like to see.
We actually have Santee TV, which is 117 and 99 is Cox and AT&T. And we're able to broadcast on that. We would have no problem moving yours over there if you wanted to. But at the same time, you go online and you pull it up and download it like that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Member Hall. Member Ela Rivera.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thanks for your work on this, Emily. Appreciate it. And thanks for bringing this to us. Sharon, I'm going to be honest, I think having just heard the item that we heard before this, I want to be really judicious in how much we invest in this. I'm all for improving access. So the cameras feel important. I do think that there's something to that. But these screens work fine for me. I just want to be as lean and efficient on this as possible. Some of the, so adding the cameras, I think that makes sense, so that folks can see the meetings. At Sandag, we use a YouTube channel. At the Community College District, we use a YouTube channel. So that's my main feedback, is just, when we're thinking about the real needs for our customers and our community, I am completely good with, us not having the most updated equipment if it means that we can invest that back into our riders. Thank you.
So can I just make a comment on that really quickly, if you don't mind? As you can see, that difference between the options really, it's not the TVs, that's really much of the cost. TVs are like pretty cheap these days as far as technology goes. The real cost, the bulk of the cost is really the AV system. We've tried as much as possible to kind of narrow that down to see the minimum of what we would actually need in order to be able to support. We got our numbers originally from looking at Sandag's. We went to their boardroom and saw what Sandag had, as well as getting their itemized line items of what they had included. And we stripped quite a bit out of it in order to try and get to a more minimal amount, just knowing that they do a lot more presentations and things like that. Ours is fairly minimal in comparison to what they do. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't want to make it seem like I'm not interested in making sure that it's a good production. Whatever the barest minimum that allows for someone to see what's going on in this room. I'd like to kind of start there, and if there's little things we want to add on, fine, but yeah, and then there's benefits to this. I don't want to diminish that. I just, it feels like, because there's no special source of funding for this, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Ela Rivera. Member Bush.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments from Member Elo Rivera, and I shared some of the same concerns. So question to staff, thank you for your hard work on this. And this isn't, also in response to public comment on not seeing the visuals, which that in the live stream is important. So what is, I think I'm struggling with what the connection between because I think we should go bare minimum, but I don't fully understand where some of the cost is coming from. So is it mostly audio system, and is the challenge the camera placement? Because I agree, I didn't really care for the stadium. That just didn't seem necessary. Like at least the screens now seem to be functional, but if they need to be replaced because it's impeding the public's view, then I think that's okay. But yeah, because can you speak more on that? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, absolutely. So the bulk of it is actually the audio, the AV equipment, as well as the cameras are pretty minimal as well, but the most of it is the audio. So there's a lot that goes behind these, the microphones and things like that. There's a lot of AV equipment that's over here that we have to manage in order to do these meetings. You probably noticed my staff sitting over on the side for the various meetings, because they're helping audio, adjust the audio and things in the background. So that is where the bulk of it comes in. There is some that would be a part of the like support agreements and things like that. That's just a certain percentage that comes on top of that. But that's definitely the bulk of the cost.
Okay, so for the audio, so this current audio system we're using now, if we upgrade and go to video, it's not gonna work.
Correct. It's very outdated and hard to maintain at this point.
Understood.
There's a lot of other things too that we've had difficulty with getting ADA compatible systems and things for our members that might want to come in or the audience that may need so.
Okay, got it. And then Sharon, so you were saying was option 3 just to replace or upgrade the existing setup? That would still allow you guys to have your all team meetings and you all on staff, right? Because you expressed that as a concern.
Yeah, so the option 3 would be just having the monitors up on the walls. So this would just stay where it is.
Okay,
And it really, I just am asking if you don't think there's anything wrong with these the way that we present this to the members, then we don't have to do anything with the televisions. Well, we weren't proposing to put something in front of you though.
so yeah, so for me, speaking for myself, I'd like to hear my colleagues, but I'm fine with the visuals, the TV screens, how they're set up now. I'm fine with, and it seems like the audio we can't get out of as the expense. So that makes sense to me. So I lean towards option 3.
Would you like to see as well, though, the cost of if you did have the monitors in front of you? Meaning, as Mr. Hall had mentioned, that you can get screens at each location as well.
Your question, is that for me?
It was for anybody,
Oh.
for everybody, I guess. Because we can certainly do that as well. It was not put into the initial cost, but that's certainly something that we can
Yeah,
entertain.
I mean, I'm open to it if member Hall wanted to describe more. I guess I want to understand what more that value is, but if it works in Santee or something, I'm open to it.
It's literally I think it's a 24-inch screen in front of us. So if you did one between us, you could sit there and look at it. I just did a quick math on it, probably about $6,000 just to put them around here.
Okay, thank you very much, Member Bush. Member Moreno.
Thank you for the presentation. I too am shocked that the public can't see us. And when they cannot see us and we speak, it makes it hard to know who's speaking, especially since we didn't state our name. In this case, I'm the only woman. I think in the budget, I'm the only woman. So that distinction, with the exception of Sharon and Karen, is made. But I think it's very important that the number one thing that we do is that we actually have a visual for folks to connect with the audio. I don't much care for the stadium or the, visual, what was mentioned earlier. I think just the audio and the visual for folks to have more access, more transparency is all I care about. I'm okay with paper. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Moreno. Is there any further discussion on this item? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. We're going to go ahead and trail item number 5, which is MTS Access Services Overview. We want to allow sufficient time for that presentation at a meeting and for executive committee discussion. So we will trail that to the next executive committee meeting. With that, we will move to our other items, and then we will move into closed session. The other items, item number 8, the draft May 18th MTS board agenda is in your packets. Is there anything that Karen, did you want to call attention to anything there?
The only thing I wanted to call attention to is there was one consent item, I think it's number 12, that I'm going to pull from the agenda. It was a potential amendment of a work order with Sandag for our San Ysidro study. It was adding more funds, but Sandag doesn't need more funds yet for the tasks that they're doing. So it seemed appropriate, like the money's in our CIP budget, it's available, whether MTS wants to self-perform some tasks or give it to Sandag, but it just wasn't ready to amend that agreement with Sandag.
Very good, thank you. Are there item number 9, other staff communications and business? Any other?
If I could just, it says here on the draft agenda for the board that it starts at 9 AM, but we're going to be starting at 8 AM.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Next Thursday's board meeting will start at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay, item number 10, committee member communications and other business. Any other communications for members of the executive committee? Seeing none. The next meeting date of this executive committee will be on June 8th at 9 o'clock in the morning. And with that, we will recess or we will move into closed session. Thank you.
A reporting out of closed session agenda item number 7 from the MTS Executive Committee meeting, closed session conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9 subdivision D4. One potential case. The executive committee received a report from legal counsel and gave instructions.
The meeting is now adjourned.